Rescue teams from all over Britain are heading for the scene of what looks to be Britain's worst air crash tonight.
In the late 80s, relations between the US and Libya were already tense due to past conflicts. This was further enunciated after an extensive and drawn-out air crash investigation of the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103. Investigators identified Libyan involvement in the conflict. Though this was a tragedy that killed 270 people and affected the lives of families irreparably, the bombing resulted in the ratification of new laws and compromises between the two countries. It also exposed major weaknesses in the security aspect of the aviation industry. On December 21, 1988, passengers were boarding Pan Am Flight 103 from London Heathrow Airport to New York. Many were going home for the holidays, not knowing this would be the last flight they would ever board. The flight took off at 6:25 p.m. with 243 passengers and 16 crew members. 32 minutes after taking off, the plane was flying over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. Within moments, this quaint town became the scene of Britain's worst air crash.
This is the little border town of Lockerbie tonight. The air is thick with smoke, flames and the smell of aviation fuel. A crater 20 feet deep marks the spot near the main Glasgow road where the jumbo jet came down.
The remains of Flight 103, along with the bodies of the 259 passengers, were strewn over an area of 2,000 square kilometers. 11 residents of Lockerbie were also killed by the crash. Within a few hours, AAIB investigators reached the crash site. The investigative team looked for clues that would indicate the cause of the conflict. On December 24, 1988, they discovered a piece of metal with signs that it had been in close proximity to an explosion. The location of this piece on the debris field was also of particular interest and identified as one of the first parts to come off the plane. Investigators learned that the piece had traces of semtax, a substance used to create plastic explosives. On December 28, 1988, the AAIB publicly announced that a bomb brought down the plane, and a criminal investigation was underway. Inspectors also began reconstructing the aircraft from parts in the wreckage to understand how the explosion took place. After they confirmed the plane was sabotaged, the team begins to find previous conflicts with other countries to identify possible suspects. Investigators initially thought that Pan Am Flight 103 was brought down as retaliation for Iran Air Flight 655, which was accidentally shot down on July 3, 1988, by a guided missile cruiser called the USS Vincennes. Another theory that was considered was that the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine cell in Germany was responsible after an anonymous warning was sent to the US Embassy in Helsinki, stating that a Pan Am plane originating from Frankfurt would be brought down by a bomb. After scouring baggage records, investigators were able to conclude that a Samsonite suitcase had carried the bomb. A circuit board was also found and identified to be part of a Toshiba cassette recorder that concealed the bomb. They began to inspect the remains of the suitcase for clues. Fragments from a pair of trousers was also recovered and sent for forensic testing. Experts identified the clothing brand to be made and sold in Malta. The seller, Anthony Gauci, told officers that he recalls selling the trousers to a man with a Libyan accent on Wednesday the 7th of December 1988, 2 weeks before the Lockerbie attack. This led investigators to consider Libya as a possible suspect and began looking for recent conflicts between the two countries.
7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities.
Economic sanctions were also imposed following the West Berlin nightclub bombing carried out by Libyan officials in 1986. With this new discovery, criminal investigators pieced together the events that made the plot possible. They learned that many of the passengers that had boarded Pan Am Flight 103 had started their journey from Frankfurt. After scouring baggage records, investigators learned that bag B8849 had connected to Frankfurt from Malta. The bag was then placed on container AVE 4041 onto Flight 103 at London. The airline failed to ensure that all bags that were loaded matched to a passenger aboard the ill-fated jumbo jet. A year later, investigators discovered a new piece of circuit board the size of a fingernail. Forensic experts from the FBI and CIA identify it to be from an MST-13 timer. The manufacturer of this timer, a Swiss company named Mebo, admitted that they regularly conducted business with Libya. The owners, Erwin Meister and Edwin Bollier, confirmed they had delivered 20 MST-13 timers to Libya, and orders for more were placed in December 1988. The Swiss company's dealings with the Libyan government was the final piece of the puzzle that led US and British inspectors to indict Libyan officials Abdel Basset al-Megrahi and Lamine Khalifa Fimma. Al-Megrahi was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison on 270 counts of murder, conspiracy to murder, and violating Britain's 1982 Aviation Security Act, while Fimma was found innocent and released. The motive of the conflict is still debated, but it is theorized that the bombing was an attempt to seek revenge for the alleged death of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi's adopted daughter. This was claimed to have happened in 1986 when the US bombed Libya. However, this is still very controversial, and some claim she is alive to this day. After the indictment, Pan Am was convicted and found guilty of willful misconduct on July 10, 1992. Prosecutors claimed that they had not matched every bag with an onboard passenger as required by compromises put into effect after the bombing of Air India Flight 182. On the 8th of January 1998, they declared bankruptcy, and on the 4th of December, they ceased operations. The events on December 21, 1988 caused the U.S. to demand Libya to turn over the two suspects, cooperate with them for the investigation, publicly renounce state-sponsored terrorism, and compromise with the families and provide monetary compensation for the death of their loved ones. Libya refused, which prompted the unanimous approval of UN Security Council Resolution 748, as well as prompted economic sanctions. Resolution 748 stated that all member states have little to no relations with Libya and reduced diplomatic and consular personnel. This included restrictions for Libyan aircraft flying over UN member states, as well as prohibiting the supply of all weapons, ammunition, and military supplies to Libya. The country therefore became isolated. This forced Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi to accept responsibility for the Lockerbie attacks and compromise with the US. The Pan Am conflict had a massive impact in various aspects of the airline industry, from screening of baggage to how the families of victims were handled. A special session of the ICAO was held on the 15th or 16th of February 1989 with an aim to improve international aviation security procedures. New standards for screening of luggage were implemented, and luggage was now inspected at check-in and between flights to make sure every bag is accompanied by a passenger and screened. New automated multi-level baggage screening systems have also been introduced. This attempt to strengthen aviation security can be considered one of the most influential compromises following the Pan Am tragedy. On November 4, 2003, new laws were ratified in North America with regard to international air travel. This was known as the Montreal Convention. It also introduced new laws regarding how airlines comply with proper security procedures and their liability to passengers and victims. The families of the victims also played a huge role in ensuring the ratification of new laws, legislation, and procedures regarding how victims and their families were handled. Today, there is little reminder on the horror that struck Lockerbie 30 years ago, but the compromises that followed still stand strong. The US and Libya did not have any major conflicts for almost 2 decades after the bombing. Most of the advancements to security are still being used today. Pan Am 103's fuselage stands at the AAIB headquarters in Farnborough, England, and is being used to train investigators from around the globe in case terrorists strike again. In a church outside the town of Lockerbie, a memorial stands in remembrance of the 270 people who sacrificed their lives for the safety of our skies. The Pan Am disaster is also testimony to the fact that monitoring and evaluating our aviation security systems is a continuous process. Anything less than will end up waiting for bodies to identify loopholes in the system for us. Nothing proved this right when in a little over a decade, we witnessed the worst terrorist attack in history on September 11, 2001.